By the middle of the 16th century, Spain appeared untouchable. No empire before it had commanded so much land, so many seas, or so much wealth. Spanish banners flew from the Low Countries to the Philippines. Across the Atlantic, entire continents were reorganized around Spanish rule. Every year, fleets returned to Seville, heavy with silver and gold drawn from the mountains of the New World. And yet, beneath this spectacle of abundance, something had already gone wrong. In 1557, without public announcement or ceremony, the Spanish crown declared bankruptcy. The declaration shocked Europe's bankers, but barely disturbed the empire's image. Treasure ships still arrived. Wars continued. The illusion of power remained intact. But the default was not an accident. It was a warning. It would not be the last. As the decades passed, Spain's finances grew more fragile even as its wealth appeared to grow. By the early 1600s, the empire carried crushing debts, its currency was steadily losing value, and inflation was tearing through everyday life. Prices rose faster than wages. Royal expenses multiplied. The gold kept flowing in, but it no longer solved anything. This contradiction defined Spain's decline. No empire in history had ever possessed such concentrated wealth, yet no empire had ever struggled so persistently to pay its bills. Spain did not fall because it lacked resources. It fell because it misunderstood them. This story is not about a lost battle or a conquered capital. Spain did not collapse under foreign invasion or internal revolt. It collapsed under success. The very wealth that made the empire powerful also rewired its economy, distorted its priorities, and weakened its foundations. Gold did not simply enrich Spain. It changed how the empire thought. It made productivity optional, discipline unnecessary, and long-term planning irrelevant. Problems could always be postponed. Debts could always be covered. Reform could always wait for the next fleet, until it couldn't. Spain's decline began not with defeat, but with dependence. And once an empire becomes dependent on effortless wealth, the fall is no longer a question of if, but when. If you want to understand how riches can quietly destroy nations, this story matters. At the dawn of the 16th century, Spain stood unmatched. The Union of Castile and Aragon had forged a centralized monarchy hardened by centuries of warfare and conquest. The Reconquista had not only unified territory, but mentality. Spain emerged disciplined, confident, and convinced of its divine purpose. Its soldiers were among the most experienced in Europe. Its fleets dominated the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Its crown commanded obedience without question. To the rest of the world, Spain looked invincible. Then history tilted in its favor. The discovery and conquest of the Americas did not merely expand Spain's borders, it transformed the nature of empire itself. For the first time, a European power gained direct control over lands rich in precious metals on a scale never before imagined. Silver from Mexico and Peru flowed into imperial vaults, with the mines of Potosí alone producing more wealth than entire European kingdoms. This was not trade, it was extraction. Year after year, treasure fleets crossed the Atlantic carrying fortunes in bullion. Seville became Europe's financial gateway. Spanish monarchs no longer needed to negotiate taxation carefully or cultivate domestic growth. Gold paid for everything: wars, diplomacy, fleets, palaces, and prestige. Spain could project power anywhere, instantly. The effect was intoxicating. Spain's rulers believed they had discovered a permanent advantage, a shortcut around the slow work of economic development. Wealth arrived without factories, power without productivity, influence without innovation. The empire expanded outward while its internal economy remained static. Other nations noticed and learned different lessons. While Spain consumed its treasure, rivals quietly built industries, trade networks, and financial institutions. England, the Netherlands, and France focused on production and commerce. Spain focused on possession. The empire's dominance looked absolute, but it was fragile. Its power rested not on what Spain made, but on what it seized. The sun never set on Spain's empire, but beneath that glow, the foundations were already weakening. Gold had made Spain rich. It had not made it strong. The flood of American gold did not fortify Spain's economy. It slowly dismantled it. As silver and gold poured into Spain, prices began to rise across the empire. What seemed like prosperity was, in reality, distortion. Wages lagged behind costs. Food became more expensive. Everyday goods drifted out of reach for ordinary Spaniards. This early wave of inflation, long before economists had a name for it, hit Spain first because Spain received the metal first. Spanish merchants could no longer compete. Domestic producers found themselves priced out of their own markets. It became cheaper to import cloth from England, weapons from Germany, and ships from the Netherlands than to make them at home. Spain, the richest empire on earth, began relying on foreign economies to supply its basic needs. Gold replaced industry. Why build workshops when bullion paid instantly? Why invest in innovation when conquest delivered returns faster? Spain's leaders chose the easiest path. The empire became a consumer, not a producer. Wealth flowed through Spain, not into it. The crown went further. Spanish monarchs began borrowing enormous sums from European bankers, especially in Genoa and the Low Countries. These loans were secured not by taxes or productivity, but by future treasure shipments. Gold that had not yet been mined was already spent. The empire was mortgaging tomorrow to finance today. This created a fragile system. When fleets were delayed by storms, piracy, or war, the entire financial structure shuddered. Payments were missed, credit evaporated, confidence collapsed. Spain declared bankruptcy not once but repeatedly, turning default into a recurring tool of governance. Gold did not remove uncertainty, it concentrated it. Spain's wealth had become a single point of failure. The empire was no longer built on people, production, or stability, but on ships crossing an ocean it could not fully control. Spain's empire appeared vast and commanding, but it was never self-sustaining. Behind the banners and fleets stood a network of foreign financiers, contractors, and soldiers who quietly kept the system alive. German banking families, Italian financiers, and Genoese creditors became essential to Spanish rule. They advanced enormous sums to the crown, underwriting wars that Spain could no longer afford up front. In return, they received interest, privileges, and influence that reached deep into imperial decision-making. Spain possessed gold, but liquidity and control over credit belonged increasingly to others. Trade followed the same pattern. Dutch and Genoese merchants dominated shipping and commerce. Spanish ports filled with foreign goods carried by foreign vessels. Even the distribution of American silver relied on international networks Spain did not fully command. Wealth passed through Spanish hands, but value was captured elsewhere. Military power, too, was outsourced. Spain relied heavily on mercenaries to fight its wars across Europe. These armies were effective but expensive. They demanded regular payment, regardless of the empire's fiscal health. Gold bought loyalty, but only temporarily. When funds ran short, mutiny and instability followed. Military strength became dependent on continuous cash flow rather than strategic planning. These arrangements came with costs that were not immediately visible. Interest payments consumed growing portions of royal income. Creditors demanded political concessions. When Spain declared bankruptcy, bankers did not simply absorb losses. They renegotiated terms, tightened conditions, and gained greater leverage over policy. Financial survival increasingly required foreign approval. At the same time, the empire expanded faster than it could govern or integrate. New territories demanded garrisons, administrators, and supplies. None of this generated productivity. Gold paid for presence, not development. Spain entered a destructive cycle. Extract treasure, borrow against it, fight wars to protect it, and extract more treasure to service the debt. This was not the construction of a durable empire. It was the gradual liquidation of one. Power was being maintained, not renewed. And each year, more of Spain's sovereignty was exchanged for temporary stability, until even that stability. There came a moment when Spain could have changed course. By the late 16th century, the empire possessed resources unmatched in Europe. The crown had access to vast wealth, global reach, and political authority strong enough to reshape society from the top down. With this power, Spain faced a defining choice, one that would determine whether its wealth became a foundation or a liability. It could invest inward. Gold could have been used to build domestic industry, encourage manufacturing, modernize agriculture, and expand education. Spain could have transformed temporary riches into long-term productivity, creating an economy capable of sustaining empire without constant extraction. Instead, the crown chose a different path. Spain doubled down on control, territorial, religious, and military. Imperial expansion remained the priority. Wars across Europe were funded without hesitation. Orthodoxy was enforced as policy, not belief. Uniformity was valued over experimentation. Obedience over innovation. This decision reshaped Spanish society. Religious conformity narrowed intellectual life. Critical inquiry weakened. Universities stagnated. Skilled minorities, merchants, artisans, financiers were expelled or marginalized, removing entire segments of economic expertise in a single generation. What remained was loyalty, not capacity. Manufacturing suffered first. Workshops closed as imported goods flooded Spanish markets. Agriculture followed, burdened by outdated systems and declining investment. Productivity fell even as wealth increased, a contradiction masked only by the steady arrival of treasure fleets. Gold made this decline invisible. Each structural weakness could be postponed. Another shipment paid the bills. Another loan bridged the gap. Short-term survival replaced long-term planning. Reform was unnecessary because consequences were delayed. But delay is not recovery. By the time Spain recognized that its domestic economy was hollow, the tools to rebuild no longer existed. There were no competitive industries to expand, no skilled workforce to mobilize, no financial institutions designed to support growth. The empire had consumed its opportunity. What remained was dependence. Gold sustained Spain's image of power, but it had quietly erased the foundations of independence. The empire had chosen dominance over development, and in doing so, sacrificed its future for its present. From that moment on, decline was no longer avoidable. For decades, Spain looked powerful, long after its strength had begun to fade. Treasure fleets continued to arrive from across the Atlantic. Royal palaces gleamed with imported wealth. Armies still marched under banners that inspired fear and respect. To observers across Europe, Spain remained the dominant force of the age, but this was an illusion carefully sustained by gold. The arrival of precious metals created the appearance of stability even as the empire's foundations weakened. Deficits were covered, soldiers were paid, and court life continued unchanged. Because the symptoms of decline were masked, reform felt unnecessary. The empire appeared functional, and so its leaders assumed it was. This false confidence proved costly. While Spain relied on treasure to maintain its status, rival powers were building something far more durable. The Dutch invested in banking, insurance, and maritime trade, creating systems that multiplied wealth rather than consumed it. England expanded manufacturing, encouraged private enterprise, and developed global trade networks. France strengthened state administration and centralized its economy to support long-term growth. These nations were not richer than Spain in raw resources. They were richer in structure. Spain, by contrast, allowed its domestic economy to stagnate. Imported goods replaced local production. Skilled labor declined. Innovation slowed. The empire became dependent on external suppliers, even for basic necessities, an extraordinary weakness for a global power. Gold kept the lights on, but it did not repair the building. Every year that reform was delayed made recovery harder. The longer Spain relied on treasure, the more uncompetitive its economy became. By the time the imbalance was obvious, it was already entrenched. By the early 17th century, Spain was no longer shaping the world. It was responding to it. Wars were fought defensively. Alliances were formed out of necessity, not strength. Policy decisions were reactive rather than strategic. The empire that once dictated terms now struggled to keep pace. Spain had mistaken visibility for resilience. The glitter of wealth concealed a hollow core, and when the illusion finally cracked, there was nothing beneath it strong enough to stop the fall. Over time, the lifeline that had sustained Spain began to weaken. The richest mines were no longer producing as they once had. Extraction costs rose steadily, while returns diminished. Smuggling siphoned off precious metals before they ever reached royal treasuries. Corruption spread through colonial administrations, and the crown's ability to enforce control across the Atlantic declined. Gold still arrived, but never in sufficient quantities to solve the problems it had created. Without a steady flow of treasure, Spain's financial structure collapsed under its own weight. Inflation, long embedded in the economy, showed no sign of retreat. Debt obligations multiplied faster than revenues. Interest payments consumed what little income remained, leaving the crown perpetually short of funds. Military weakness soon followed economic strain. Armies that once dominated Europe struggled to maintain discipline and supply. Key territories slipped away, not always through decisive battles but through exhaustion and neglect. Provinces revolted. Rivals advanced. Spain found itself defending what it had once commanded. This decline was not abrupt. It was prolonged and uneven. Gold had delayed the moment of reckoning, allowing Spain to appear powerful long after its foundations had eroded. But delay did not change the outcome. When the treasure lost its power to stabilize the empire, there was nothing left to support it. Spain still possessed land, titles, and memories of greatness. What it lacked was an economic engine capable of sustaining power. The empire that had reshaped the world did not collapse in spectacle. It receded quietly, its dominance replaced by systems it had helped finance but never learned to build itself. Spain extracted unimaginable wealth from the Americas, but it did not keep it. The true beneficiaries were Europe's financial and industrial powers. Spain's gold fueled the rise of capitalism elsewhere. It financed banks, industries, and empires that would outlast Spain by centuries. Gold reshaped the world, but not in Spain's favor. This is the final lesson. Wealth alone does not create power. Systems do, institutions do, productivity does. Without them, even infinite riches become a curse. Spain did not die from poverty. It died from abundance without discipline. If you want more stories about how power really rises and falls, subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Subscribe to Mindforge for cinematic history that reveals how empires truly rise, decay, and disappear.